back with another review, and today we're going to talk about the 1987 film Masters of the Universe. And this was requested by Bobby Reynolds. Thank you, Bobby, for the request. So before we get into the film itself, of course, let's talk about the plot real quick. And to keep it brief, so you have the planet Eternia, and Skeletor, our villain, seizes power and seeks ultimate control, forcing our main character He-Man and his allies to flee to Earth, where they must recover a powerful device and stop Skeletor. And that is the plot here in a nutshell. So with that being said, let's get into the film itself. Before I talk about the film here and get into some thoughts, I think I have to mention, right up front, like my history with Masters of the Universe, I have no history. I think the cartoon came out in like 83. I was born in 89, so I missed it by, 6 years. And so, I really don't have any attachment to the franchise, like I really don't know the characters that well. I really don't know the property that well. The only thing that, of course, that I'm familiar with is the dynamic of, He-Man versus Skeletor. And that's pretty much it. So, yeah, I'm definitely, going into this film with fresh eyes, from a casual perspective here. Again, I've never seen the cartoon. I don't know the characters. I don't know the planet of Eternia. I know they're coming out with a new movie. In fact, I think there's a new trailer out today. So, weird timing, but yeah, so I just wanted to mention that up front before, I get into the film here and talk about some stuff because, just so you know, I'm not really familiar with the characters and the properties. So, with that being said, let's talk about some stuff here and review the film. The movie, it starts off rather quickly. You have characters that are introduced and, there's very little setup, and very little introduction with our characters, which at first, is kind of hard for me to connect to at first, but I can appreciate the film getting right to the point here, and definitely you can see it's low budget here. The film, it definitely has a distinct 80s charm. And for me, that's what I enjoyed about the movie. And I think at the time, it was the most expensive film, or the second most expensive film by Canon, because you also had Superman 4 that came out the same year. And I don't know which was the most expensive. I think it may have been this one, it may have been Superman 4. I'm open to correction. But Dolph Lundgren, of course, he's plays the character of He-Man here. And at first, my first impressions of Dolph Lundgren as He-Man, I kind of felt like, oh, I like Dolph Lundgren, but he seems a little bit green here, as a term that they would use in sports. But, I think it's still like a watchable performance here, given the lack of introduction and context. Frank Langella as Skeletor, he's definitely the standout here. Bringing a strong voice and presence, and just good, villain energy. The supporting cast here, it's solid, but nothing like special. I mean, you have Meg Foster in the film as the character of Evil Lynn, and Meg Foster, definitely has an interesting look. I remember she was in Leviathan, and she has those very striking blue eyes. Other characters here, you have the character of Man-at-Arms, played by John Cypher, the character of Tila, played by Jesse Field, and I thought they were fine performances. James Token has a small but enjoyable part in the film, and he had just passed away in the last few days. Like, I watched this film last week, and like 2 or 3 days later, he passed away. And it's unfortunate, a good character actor. Of course, he played Strickland in Back to the Future, and he had a a fun part in the movie. This film here, I say for me, he was the second most fun part, like character in the film. And just seeing his character go completely ham on, these aliens and stuff like that, and, using a shotgun. So again, he was fun here. You also have Courtney Cox and Robert Duncan McNeil, as our earthly characters, and I thought they worked well enough. The character of Gwildor, I don't know if this character was in the cartoon or it was just made for this movie here, but the voice and the look at the character for me came off annoying. Definitely reminded me of like Warwick Davis's Leprechaun. It's like this character looks like a reject from Neverending Story. That's my impression. But other stuff here, the look of Eternia, the visuals of Eternia, I thought provided some nice eye candy, especially considering the budget limitations. The direction by Gary Goddard, it's serviceable, given the budget, given the limitations of the, budget. And I understand there were some allegations made about this director, some years back, and I don't know much about those allegations. And it may be only why he directed one film. I mean, this is the only film in his filmography, and like other stuff he worked on was like theme park rides. So I mean, yeah. But and talking about the source material, it's for me hard to critique because again, I really don't have a familiarity with the characters or the property, so I don't know how much, they deviate from the source material, what is true to the source material. I understand why diehard fans may not like the movie. They love the cartoon, and like when this film came out, they're like, huh? This is what we get kind of thing. Maybe it's one of those things that they could have waited a little bit longer to make the movie. Maybe they would have had a little bit more of a budget and this and that. So I understand like, that could be a factor. But I still think that with all things considered, it still works on its own terms. Like I hate the word cheesy to describe a movie, but for me, it's like a fun slice of 80s cheese. Like like if I could put that cheese on a pizza, to me, it works as like a fun slice of, 80s charm and, with a little bit of cheese, but enough charm to make it enjoyable. And that's what I like about the movie. And, the score provided by Bill Conti, he provides the score here. So, yeah, I mean, I like the movie with the limitations and, the things that, they can only do, at this time for this movie. I did like it. So let me get to my overall thoughts on Masters of the Universe. And overall, despite its flaws and budget limitations, Masters of the Universe definitely has a distinct charm, highlighted by Frank Langella's performance as Skeletor. And if I were to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, for me, I'm going to give this a 6. So, yeah, I did like the movie. But thank you, Bobby, for the request. Thank you all for watching, and have a good day.